from the College by the Lake, Coeur d'Alene, Idaho. Local, regional, national, and international guests discussing the issues and topics affecting the way you live are on Forum, the North Idaho College Public Forum, with your host and moderator, political scientist Tony Stewart.
Today we wish to discuss with you a very serious topic and a growing problem in our country, and that is violence against women. I would like to share with you some very disturbing statistics from the year 1990. In 1990, there were 683,000 rapes against adult women in our country. Also that same year, there were 20,045 people murdered in this country. Of that number, 15,628 were men and 4,399 were women. What is also pinpointing the problem that we're discussing, of all the men that were killed, 85% were murdered by males, and 90% of all women who were murdered were by males. Also, it has been reported that it is estimated that about 12 million American women have been raped, and also 61% of all of those victims were under the age of 18. Two other statistics I'd like to share with you before we get into interviewing our guest on this very serious subject. Every 15 seconds, a woman is beaten by her husband or boyfriend in this country. And also each year, 4 million women are severely assaulted by their current or former partner. With those grim statistics, we wish to proceed with this issue of violence against women, and I wish to welcome to our program Star Utheen, who is the Executive Director of the Women's Center in Coeur d'Alene, Idaho. Star has been a friend a long time, and I can testify to the fact that she is certainly out front in northern Idaho in dealing with this problem and the whole issue of women's rights and issues. Star, welcome to the program.
Thank you, Tony. It's a privilege to be here.
And I'm pleased to have on the panel two members today to join in questioning our guests. First of all is Janelle Burke, who is an attorney in the state of Idaho. And next to her is Lloyd Marsh, who is a member of the faculty at North Idaho College in the field of the physical sciences. I shall ask Janelle to commence the questioning.
Star, let's begin by talking about the background of some of this violence. Is it more likely to repeat from generation to generation than if there has not been violence in the home?
Absolutely. In fact, in 1991, Larry Echohawk, our Attorney General here in Idaho, put together a task force around these issues, and what they found was that 60% of young boys who are raised in a home where there's domestic violence go on to abuse their partners as adults. And 55% of the girls who are raised in those homes go on to marry a partner who will abuse them. So we are recycling that violence.
And so what can we do about that? How can we break that cycle?
There are so many different aspects to look at. Certainly education is right on top. Our culture, our schools, our churches, our homes, we need to take a look at domestic violence as a crime. It's not keeping your home in line. It's none of that. You know, we have an early American law, actually Old English law, that carried over to our country called the rule of thumb. So it was actually in our law books that said that a man can beat his wife as long as he doesn't use anything larger than his thumb. So it was legitimized. It was in our laws that that could happen. And we have come a long way from that. There's still a long way to go. We need to really impact the curriculum in the local schools, wherever we are, to teach young people that it's a crime, that it's unacceptable, that they have a right to be safe in their own homes, they have a right to self-determination. No one else should be dictating to them what choices they'll make in their life, isolating them so that they have no contact outside of their home.
Now, in a case where there is some abuse already going on, what can those people do? Because many times I'm sure they want out from, and I'm talking about both the abused person and the person who abuses. Both of them want out from underneath this situation that is very unpleasant for them. What can they do? Can they go to counseling? How successful is that?
Treatment really is the answer, and it needs to go on with both of the parties, because it isn't just the batterer that has those behavioral patterns developed. As the earlier statistics that I quoted from the task force, these people grow up in a home where the models that are before them teach them This is what it is to be a mommy, and this is what it is to be a daddy, a husband and a wife. And they grow up over the years expecting that in their adult life, and they buy right into it. We've seen that over the years with alcoholic families. People who grow up in alcoholic families tend to marry into alcoholic families. And just as with domestic violence, it isn't because they want that. It's not that they desire that for their life, but it's what they know. It's what they're comfortable with. It's the arena within which they know how to work. So, one of the things we talk about is that this culture, certainly as a feminist, it's clear to me and those who take a look at these issues that this culture has been very difficult on women. And it's just in the last few years in this program that I've come to realize how difficult this culture has been on men. We raise little boys telling them, don't you cry, don't you be a sissy, be a man, get hit out on the baseball field and you're not supposed to show any pain. That's one thing if they grow up in a loving, supportive home. But if they grow up in a home where there's violence and they are constantly told to stuff those feelings, to avoid expressing those feelings, what they learn is not to experience what they feel. By the time they get to be an adult, they have all those feelings inside, no means to express them. And when they get angry, when they get drunk, what they do is turn and look for someone who's weaker to take it out on. It was just recently, I think maybe in the last 2 years, when I came to realize when we talk about the cycle of violence, most people are familiar with the honeymoon phase, right after the violence has taken place, where the batterer will say, I'm so sorry. I'll never do it again. They send flowers that, things are wonderful for those few days or weeks. Just recently, I began to realize that he really does mean that. He is horrified by his behavior. And if he had the tools to manage differently within his family, I believe that he would do it. But treatment is the answer. You have to go and delve into that tender place inside where all those feelings of rage and pain and fear and whatever dwell. Get them out, identify them, and learn some new patterns of communication, of managing within a relationship, and turn away from the violence. But it isn't just enough to wish it was different. You have to actively commit yourself to treatment, and both people in that couple, because one person being treated and coming back into the couple, they tend to fall back in the same patterns. Both people need to take a look at that, examine their own behavior.
Lloyd Marsh.
Well, Star, recognizing that we have to provide some facilities and a place, a haven for these abused women, can you tell us a little bit about your Women's Center and what are the facilities that are available there and what kind of counseling can they get?
Sure, glad to do that. The Coeur d'Alene Women's Center is the only domestic violence shelter in the 5 northern counties. And we're currently in a 5-bedroom home. One of those bedrooms serves as an office and a bed for the 24-hour staff. So what we have are 4 bedrooms. Our basic policy is that we try to provide a private room for mother and children. So they have a place where they can go and be family together quietly. The rest of the house is common area. So we have enough room for 4 women and children. Now if we have a couple of single women, we may have 5 or 6 women altogether. That's totally inadequate. We are almost always full and having to turn people away or network with other programs to get them someplace where they can be safe. We also have a support group on Friday afternoon between 2 and 4. It's an open women's support group facilitated by 2 wonderful counselors. So there's a place where women who don't have the resources to perhaps get a private counselor, pay the kinds of fees, can come in without cost and sit and talk about these issues, get some education, get some support. We have court advocates who can go to court and help them get a protection order. They can also go to court with them if charges are filed, assault and or battery, or if it's a rape, if it's going to go to trial. So a lot of good support around the justice system for them. we try to educate throughout the community at the schools and the churches anytime we're asked to come in and speak, and more we are asked. It's wonderful to get the information out there, to express the needs of the program, and to let people know about what the services are that are available. Anticipating questions about the protection order, maybe we could talk about that so that people who aren't aware of the law and what their options are would know. Protection orders are available at the Civil Court Clerk's office. They are without fee. A person can go in, fill out the documentation, and will be seen by a judge that day. Certainly we advise people to try to go in early in the day so they don't run into 5 o'clock. The judge will hear them, discuss whether or not they feel a protection order is appropriate. If so, it is an ex parte order, which means that one of those parties was present. It's good on a temporary basis up to 2 weeks, that the hearing will be set in that 2-week period. Papers are sent through the system and served on the respondent, hopefully that day or the next day, with a date when he can come back and be heard by the judge. So in that 2-week period, these two people come back before the judge. The judge will review the case at that time, and if he feels it's appropriate, will make a 90-day protection order. Now that 90-day protection order can be extended at the end of the 90 days, and the judge at that time has an option to make it anything between 90 days and a year.
We were talking about this in the context of Idaho, and so I'm sure
Yes.
we're going to have viewers from other
Yes.
places, and they may want to check their own local jurisdictions for what the law may be there. But I
Yes.
believe that all of the surrounding jurisdictions do have something similar in place. Is that not correct?
That's right. We call it a protection order in Idaho. I believe that Montana and Washington are referring to it as a restraining order. And they can call their local programs and find out what the terms of those orders would be. Now, in our case, we have court advocates within our system at the Women's Center who can help people fill those out, who can give them some sense of what the judge is looking for, and go to court with them if they need that kind of support.
While we're on the issue of legislation, too, I know that you were working very diligently, Star, in the last legislative session. There is another area that faces women, and also it's been involved in hate crime and so forth, that an individual will be obsessed with following a particular person, what we call stalking that individual. Idaho, I believe, is really in the forefront in legislation. Would you also share that with our viewers? If some individual is being followed around, or wherever they drive, someone drives around and follows them, what does that legislation encompass?
This is the first year that that's in place, Tony. I'm sure you're familiar with it. If a person is repeatedly, maliciously harassed, followed, they need to contact law enforcement and report that, and ask that a report be made, filed, because documentation is going to be necessary down the line, because there is an issue of repeated behavior, so that it does need to get documented. At this time, it's a misdemeanor, good for 1,000 years, $1,000, up to $1,000 or a year in the county jail. The good news is that if that person is convicted again within a 7-year period, it becomes a felony for the same kind of crime. So there really is teeth in that law, and we're very pleased to see that. It does go to a felony. It's the first year that that's in place, and so there is some refinement that we're going to have to go back and work on during the next legislative session. There's some question about what repeated means. We see that with all of the laws that come through on these issues. You know, it is clarified for us during the year about confusion in certain districts.
Refinement.
So, got to go back and refine it, and we'll be doing that with this one.
Also, in this whole question of an individual who's been a victim, so many times they don't understand how important documentation is down
Yes.
the road. You've indicated already that it's very important to report those incidents to the police and have that on record, even if something doesn't happen at that time. It could be helpful to the court later. Secondly, would you discuss the idea that even in addition to reporting to police, that if people keep almost like a log of incidents, I know that in our work against hate crimes, that if individuals will document at that time and put down dates and times, isn't that very helpful for investigation and prosecution at a later time?
It's so important. People think they're never going to forget, but they do. Your mind begins to block that out. And then, getting on the stand and having confusion about, did this happen before that happened, or did I know that when this? You need to document every episode that happens. If there's a phone call, if you have contact with an agency, with law enforcement, who did you talk to, what was the day, what was said? You need to document everything. We encourage people to keep a log. It's not the most pleasant thing to do, but it's so helpful, particularly if there's going to be a trial down the line.
I want to move in one other area, and then I'll go back to the panel. I, in talking with you earlier today, was so impressed with your knowledge and your empathy and understanding for victims. When individuals have faced maybe victimization, maybe all their life, growing up, and then, as you said, they are attracted to staying within this environment, would you explain to our viewers, we've already mentioned this a little bit, but I want to really get into depth on what is at the heart of this problem? What do we do to individuals in our society, in our culture, or even around the world, in dealing with lack of self-esteem, rejection, and so forth? Could you just shed some more light on what that does to the person and the consequences for that person and other people around them in their lives?
This kind of behavior is so pervasive, and it affects a person on every level. We can talk for days about it. Someone who's grown up in a home as a child where violence was commonplace, expect that in their adult life. When they get into a relationship where it's going on, they may believe that that's what they deserve, that's what it is to be a woman in a marriage. There are just so many different things. One of the things that I feel very strongly about, when people ask me at times about why doesn't she leave, one of the things that comes to mind, even if I don't say it very often, is that part of the reason is that women are raised in a culture where they're not even mentioned. Our language is male-based. And they grow up believing they're not even worthy of mention. It seems so basic to me, but it's really critical. If you've been raised in a culture where everything is in terms of sportsmanship and policemen and manning the phone, it's not clear to you, but there's this underlying message that goes on year after year that tells you that you are unworthy. That the value in this culture is in terms of men. And we do that to our young men and women in our educational system, in our homes. I think we need to be really sensitive to that. It's interesting, too, I can remember a woman who came in not too long ago talking about how she'd spent 10 years getting out of a domestic violence situation and had gone on a few years later to have a very healthy relationship, a healthy marriage. And we celebrated that for a few minutes and then talked about the fact that quite often this had happened to her. Women who were raised in a home like that, experienced a marriage like that, and if they were fortunate enough to get into a marriage that was healthy, somewhere down the line, a year or two later, they start to wonder where the excitement in their life has gone. Where's the drama? It's an addiction to chaos, to adrenaline. I mean, it's a lifestyle that's developed from childhood that you expect things to be hectic, chaotic. When you wind up in a relationship, fortunately, where you're treated well, where things are done on a reasonable schedule, where your home isn't torn up and crazy all the time, it can be boring. And it takes treatment, it takes counseling for a person to recognize that those changes are good for them and that they need to adjust and adapt to a new kind of lifestyle. There are so many different avenues to come at this. We can go on and talk about it for days.
Janelle Burke.
Well, first I want to talk, I have a two-pronged question, but first I want to talk a little bit about the fact that sometimes we think of domestic violence as just between a husband and wife, but it's not really. It could be between a parent and child.
That's right.
It could be abusive relationship toward a child. It could be an abusive relationship of an older child toward an elderly parent.
Yes.
So do you want to expose our viewers somewhat to what kinds of domestic violence there can be, that it's not just one thing. And it's also not just physical, it can be other kinds of
Emotional
abuse as well.
That's right. The law that provides for the protection order, part of the definition there is household member. So it's anyone who lives together, ever lived together, or had a child in common and never lived together. So it can be roommates, it can be, as you say, elders, children, any combination of people who have lived in the same house, even if they're not living in that house anymore. And we talk, I try to avoid talking in terms of he and she, because it isn't always he and she. The batterer isn't always he. Sometimes men are battered. I think statistically, nationwide, it's probably less than 2%. We believe that it's much greater than that. Men tend not to come forward and ask for services, and certainly they don't come to the Women's Center to ask for services. But men are being battered as well. Anyone who's in a situation where another has that kind of control over them, whether it be physical or emotional, in many of the domestic violence cases that come through the Women's Center, there's also a sexual violence aspect to it. It goes into all areas of our lives.
Now, do cases progress? And that's the second part of my
Yes.
question. They progress. And so one starts out with a certain kind of relationship and then it begins to change somehow. Can we talk a little bit about that? And I have heard that one of the reasons many times that women don't leave on the first or the second occasion is because it takes a while for this whole thing to develop. And that sometimes it takes a long time before they're ready to say, I quit. Is that a correct way of understanding?
Making the assumption that these people were together because they loved each other in the first place, that tends to bond them together and they stay together for a long time. It seldom gets better. It almost always escalates. And certainly the final outcome is death. We had not experienced death in our program. In the last year, we've had 7 deaths that were related to our program. It's frightening, the escalation of violence. People ask us a lot about, is it happening more or are there more people reporting? And we believe it's both. When we're talking about domestic violence or sexual violence, people are more willing to come forward and talk about it. The issues are more openly discussed. But it's the violence itself, the level of violence that's escalating that frightens us. In 1991, Idaho had 20 homicides. Now the good news is that in 1988 we had 35, so it was down significantly. That's great. But out of those 20, 9 of them were domestic violence related. 45% of the homicides in 1991 were domestic violence related. Now we can impact those numbers by, as a society, as a state, being clear that domestic violence is a crime, that it's not acceptable, it is inappropriate behavior, and looking for the ways to teach people how to deal with their anger, their issues, whatever they might be, in a less violent manner.
That leads directly into my next question. We talk about recycling the violence, and this infers some sort of, to get out of this track, we infer some sort of behavioral modification. Are professional counseling services available through the Women's Center?
Yes and no. We are a crisis intervention organization. We're there to help people in the midst of the crisis. We can refer them on to wonderful counseling services in town. We have short-term counseling services available in the midst of the crisis. We are working right now, though, to develop a batterer treatment program. There's a model program in Boise that's been very successful. There's also one in Spokane. We work with the Y over in Spokane, the YWCA. And we are working right now with folks from the prosecutor's office and counselors to put together a batterer treatment program that we will present to the judges and hope that they will feel comfortable enough with to mandate treatment like we do with DUI.
Would you comment, in most cases that we're faced with this domestic violence, it's a track that one can't get out of by themselves. They need help.
They do need help. They do need help. But the good news is that treatment can turn their lives around. When we talk about pedophilia, most of the accepted theory about it is that behavioral changes are so minute that it's almost not worth the effort. It's not true with domestic violence. These people, once they delve into where their own pain resides and really get a sense of how that was done to them and how it makes them feel, can learn new behavioral patterns. We see great success when people commit themselves to treatment. And that may take 6 months, it may take a year. It's a long process. It isn't an event. It isn't like they come in one night and hear the word and suddenly it's okay, because there are a lot of changes to make in their lives, and it takes time. It's like learning not to drink, not to be an addict of any sort. It takes a lot of time.
That was my next question, and it had to do with, excuse me, the fact, like an alcoholic, isn't the first step admitting that you need help?
Yes?
And if until that happens, can you have very much success?
Not at all. Not at all. And in fact, what we see is typical of the batterer is that he places the blame on others. If you had dinner ready on time, this wouldn't have happened. If the kids would just be quiet, this wouldn't happen. If I hadn't had a drink, this wouldn't happen. We just returned from a wonderful conference in Portland. Alan Jenkins from Adelaide, Australia, presented a conference about men who abuse. And his theory is an invitation to responsibility, to invite them to accept responsibility for their behavior, to help them see what do they want from a relationship. Do they want a wife who is afraid to speak in front of them, who walks around on eggshells and sits in the back seat? Or do they want a relationship that is loving and caring and responsive to one another, and that they're equal partners? Most of these people will say that's exactly what they want. They just don't know how to get it. They have not been taught the tools. They were raised in a home where it wasn't going on, and the educational process didn't give it to them. So it's a matter of relearning a behavioral pattern.
And for the victim, who oftentimes doesn't admit that they are a victim. I know in
Yes.
our work and another area, the hate crimes again, oftentimes there is a denial process.
Yes.
And so don't you have the same problem that until they admit that they too must make some decisions and to get out of certain circumstances, they will keep going back into that environment until that happens?
We see that repeatedly. We see women who come through the shelter program who maybe got away from a relationship that caused them to come to us 2 years ago, but they have re-entered a relationship that's the same thing. We see that with both men and women. They repeat the pattern, and we talk to them about that they need to take a look at their own behavioral patterns if they want to have a healthy relationship down the line.
Star, I'm so sorry to interrupt, and I know the panel joins me in thanking you for your most informative comments that are very helpful, and we'll have to have you back at another time to continue into some other areas that we weren't able to cover today. Thank you again.
Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, I know you found this program most informative, and we hope that it has been helpful to many of our viewers, and I would like to invite you to be with us again next week at this same time when we shall discuss what we believe to be a very important subject. Until then, please have a good week. I am Tony Stewart.
The North Idaho College Public Forum was videotaped live from the studios of Telemedia Services on the campus of North Idaho College for viewing at this more appropriate time. We invite you to join us again next week for another all-new edition of the North Idaho College Public Forum on this public television station.